I am Damonous. Jesus is my king. You are my family. Hello, I am Damonous. Thanks for joining. Sometimes when I'm setting up to do a YouTube video, I have a topic in mind, and all I want to do is just have a quick definition of something I'm going to talk about in that video. And then you kind of go down the rabbit hole. And that's what happened here when I tried to get a quick definition on what is fascism, or what is a fascist. Because that's a word that's used so much anymore. And I do believe there are elements in our government today, and for many years, that speak to fascism, or at least I should say an acceptance of fascist principles. I'm not saying this particularly with the Trump regime, or particularly with Obama, or with Bush, or with Clinton, but it's kind of a gradual type of frog in the frying pan, or frog in the boiling pot type of thing, where some things just become acceptable that are associated with the principle. But really what we want to do is, when communicating with someone, right, is understand what the definition is. It's easier said than done when it comes to fascism. Elusive definition of fascist. And interestingly enough, people were searching this more than anything else on dictionary.com, Merriam-Webster, last year, 2016. And in this article, this is where we're going to start seeing some of the stuff. I'm going to compare it for you. It says, perhaps the best definition comes from Robert Paxton, Professor Emeritus at Columbia University. And he says, it's a dynamic process rather than a fixed ideology like socialism or communism. There are 5 steps on Paxton's road to hell, and not all fascist parties made it past the second step. But that's just one doctor's view of fascism. What's interesting is how the term has changed over time. Here we can see for an article from the Daily Caller, and this is really not an article, it's just a commentary, but Derek Hunter here, he's saying that basically Google has changed its definition to be more in tune with the mainstream media's definition of fascism, to make it easier to pin the term on Trump and his associates. Or just, let's say, forget Trump, conservatives, Republicans, whomever, easier to call conservatives fascists. And what this gentleman points out is that fascism really isn't associated, at least in the classical way that we think of fascism as, Hitler or Mussolini. Those were not really right-wing guys. Mussolini was very much a liberal, rose to power on left ideologies. And really, even with Hitler, we have the National Socialist Party of Germany, right? So Nazis were socialists. Socialism is not a right-wing concept. So he says, the exact reason Google has changed the definition of fascism to reflect on the political right rather than the left is unknown. However, Google co-founder Sergey Brin, one of the world's richest men, has been a vocal critic of President Trump, an activist liberal, and has protested the president's executive order on immigration. And so, this can be, we can look at this here, right? If you type definition of fascism, what you get in Google is an authoritarian and nationalistic right-wing system of government and social organization, extreme right-wing, authoritarian, or intolerant views or practice. And we can see here from the dictionary.com definition that it is true that it's a more open definition. It's saying a governmental system led by a dictator having complete power, forcibly suppressing opposition and criticism, regimenting all industry, commerce, etc., and emphasizing an aggressive nationalism and often racism. And here we can go to Wikipedia and get yet another definition, a little bit of a variant, right? It's a form of radical authoritarian nationalism characterized by dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, and control of industry and commerce. And this is what I remember reading several years ago, and I can't remember where I saw the definition. It might have been in an old school paper encyclopedia, or it might have been, who knows anymore with stuff that changes online, right? It could have been the dictionary.com definition. I don't know, but what I remember is having a pretty clear definition that fascism was the effect of a government controlling its citizens through private industry. In other words, being so highly regulatory that it uses these corporations and structures to enforce its policies on the people. And that's not saying that dictatorial situation doesn't exist. It's saying that this is the way it exerts its power, politically, socially. Other interesting info as it is going along this path is this article. Is Donald Trump a fascist? Yes and no. And in this article from Slate, gentleman interviews Paxton, which was talked about in the other area, Robert Paxton, a leading authority on the history of fascism. And in here, there's a lot of things where they talk about how Donald Trump does exhibit fascist concepts, but they do get down to how they think that, or how Paxton thinks Trump is not fascist. And he says here, I think there are some powerful differences. To start with, in the area of programs, the fascists offer themselves as remedy for aggressive individualism, which they believed was the source of the defeat of Germany in World War I and the decline of Italy, the failure of Italy. World War I, the perceived national decline, they blamed on individualism, and their solution was to subject the individual to the interests of the community. Trump and the Republicans generally, and indeed a great swath of American society, have celebrated individualism to the absolute total extreme. Trump's idea and the Republican plan is to lift the burden of regulation from businesses. And it says, is there anything else? The other differences are the circumstances in which we live. Germany had been defeated catastrophically in war, following which was the Depression, which was almost as bad in Germany as it was here. Italy, on the brink of civil war in 1919, there were massive occupations of land by frustrated peasants. Actual problems those countries addressed have no parallel to today. So here he's saying a couple of important things, right? Fascism was about total power, and it was not about celebrating individualism at all, or freedom, as we always talk about it. So there's some other things here. Again, you can find other doctors. Here's Dr. Lawrence Brett, sourcefreeinquiry.co. And he has 14 defining characteristics of fascism. And here we can get yet another view of what is fascism, right? And this is excerpted from Fascism, a very short introduction by Kevin Passmore. And in here, we've got a nice little bullet point list again. Defining fascism. All right, so it's ultranationalism, charismatic leadership, dictatorship, racism, anti-Semitism, a single party, parliamentarism, violence, actual or threatened, corporatism, totalitarian ideology, anti-capitalism, anti-socialism and anti-communism, anti-liberalism, anti-parliamentarianism, anti-constitutionalism. So, here again, I don't think you can say that the current presidential administration is anti-constitutionalist, or that if it's anti-socialist or anti-communist, it's a bad thing. I mean, as Americans, we are anti-socialist, we are anti-communist in general. There are your Bernie Sanders who embrace socialism openly, and there are other government officials who slyly use socialistic principles. But I think one thing that everyone really knows is that America stands against communism and socialism. But wrapping this up, I thought the most interesting thing was this dissertation from George Orwell back in 1944 on what is fascism. And even then, of all the unanswered questions of our time, perhaps the most important is, what is fascism? But in here, it says, conservatives, all conservatives, appeasers or anti-appeasers, are held to be subjectively pro-fascist. British rule in India and the colonies is held to be indistinguishable from Nazism. Organizations of what one might call a patriotic and traditional type are labeled crypto-fascist or fascist-minded. Socialists, defenders of old-style capitalism, maintain that socialism and fascism are the same thing. Some Catholic journalists maintain that socialists have been the principal collaborators in the Nazi-occupied countries. Communists, a considerable school of thought, refuses to recognize a difference between the Nazi and the Soviet regimes, and holds that all fascists and communists are aiming at approximately the same thing and are even to some extent the same people. There's more in here, but I'm just going to define it myself, because I think this is the reality. Socialists, communists, fascists are the same thing. They seek to achieve the same ends by any means necessary, and that is to destroy the individual, that is to destroy freedom, and as one of their chief methods for doing this, it's to create chaos. It's to make people afraid. So can we call the current presidential administration fascist? Can we call the previous one fascist, or the one before that? There are fascistic principles in government today, in American government today. But I don't think we can pin completely the term fascism on any of these. But we can say that there are principles at play in America, and worst of all, in the body politic. That's you and me. That socialism, communism, fascist principles are okay in some states, in some situations. It's okay to have global health care. It's important to have it, right? This is why there's this fight right now in Congress, and we can't repeal Obamacare. Because some people say we must have some handout from the government. We must have the government telling us to actually buy insurance one way or the other, or not live free. These are fascistic principles. Fascism, communism, socialism takes away the individual, diminishes the individual. That is the thing to be afraid of. Not a boogeyman listed as a fascist. Thanks for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Catch me on these alternate media sources.